Well, I'm so pleased to be talking to Audrey Tang, who's the digital minister of Taiwan and a pioneer in so many respects. So we're just going to have a sort of conversation. And I suppose one question many people around the world are asking is, you've really been able to leverage digital approaches and capacities to strengthen democracy. How have you been able to do that, and what have you done? I'm thinking of, your human-centered approach, engaging citizens, obviously, digital rights, data privacy, all these dramatically large words, and what I find wonderful, that you've used digital hackers for support in whatever you're doing.
Yes. So what we've done can be summarized as we countered the pandemic successfully with no lockdown. And we countered the infodemic also successfully with no takedown. And we enabled these digital democracy works through social innovation. That's everyone's business with everyone's help on the three pillars of fast, fair, and fun. So through fast, fair, and fun, we've been able to engage the public by making the state transparent to the citizens, unlike authoritarian regimes which are focused on making citizens transparent to the state.
Well, you mentioned, I like that, fast, fair, and fun. 3 Fs, yes. You had this Gov Zero project, I think, a sort of shadow digital democracy. Can you just tell me a tiny bit about that?
Certainly. So for all digital service in Taiwan, which often ends with something .gov.tw as the domain name, the civic hackers or the social sector technologists, they can fork this service. Fork meaning taking it to a different direction, but with the aim to eventually merge back in. Okay, so for example, when we started rationing out masks last February in 2020, the people in the Gov Zero movement built unannounced, like we didn't know about it, but they just built overnight a visualization that shows which pharmacies or store still have the mask in stock and which has run out of stock. And they initially relied on crowdsourcing, meaning people queuing in line can just report, like OpenStreetMap or Ushahidi, report the availability. However, because it gained popularity very quickly, I stepped in, because I'm also part of Gov Zero community, stepped in and asked the premier, the head of our cabinet, saying, why don't we just trust the citizens with real-time open data? And so just the next day, we started publishing every 30 seconds the real-time availability of all the pharmacies' mask stock. So we don't need to rely on citizens to report, but the visualization, the mask map, and the chatbots, more than 100 of those, are still prototyped and operated by the civic technologists, not by the state.
Has anyone tried to copy that anywhere else?
You mean around the world? Definitely.
Yeah, around the world, yes. Because, in a way, you're a model.
Right. So the very next month, I think it was March 2020, people in Seoul, Korea, said, if Taiwan can do this, certainly we can do it too. So they convinced the pharmacists in their municipality to start to publish the open data in the same format, in the JSON format. Now, the first map that actually run in South Korea is still prototype in Tainan. It's from a Taiwanese, Fin Zhenqiang is the name, civic technologist, part of the Gov Zero movement. Although he doesn't speak Korean, speaks JavaScript. So just by changing the parameters a little bit to read from the Korean pharmacy's data, the same map with a lot of triangles and so on can actually work to help the Korean people to navigate to their nearby pharmacies that still have masks in stock.
Well, I like that idea that there's a new language which we know that exists, that people were actually communicating with, but they weren't doing like we're doing now, having a chat. Obviously, your whole pandemic response has been pretty amazing. Now, the question is, what are the other things you've done, and you would have done in any case had there not been a pandemic?
So before the pandemic hits, I was working on counter disinformation. Now, infodemic is a new word, right? I think it's coined by the WHO. That said, it's an abundance of noise and information, not necessarily wrong, it's just bias or something, part of the pandemic. But in Taiwan, even before the pandemic, we suffer from the infodemic already. In the time leading up to our presidential election, there's a lot of disinformation around, for example, the Hong Kong protest, which was shaping up to be the deciding factor in 2019 leading up to our 2020 presidential election. I still remember there was a rumor, a disinformation, that said the young people in Hong Kong, they're being paid millions of dollars to murder police and so on. And some young people, quote unquote, have bought iPhones by protesting in the riots and so on. And of course, these interestingly didn't really spread in Hong Kong. It spread in Taiwan because it was aiming to discredit the Hong Kong protesters and therefore influence the outcome of our presidential election. And through what we call the collaborative fact-checking or co-facts community, which is a Gov Zero initiative, people can, after they see this information, not even publicly, even on the end-to-end encrypted chat rooms called Line in Taiwan, is like WhatsApp, they can just long press such message and forward it to fact-checkers, much like how you would flag incoming email as spam or scam or phishing. You can flag incoming messages as disinformation. And the professional journalists as well as volunteers from the Gov Zero community collaboratively find out, oh, actually that photo, which is a Reuters photo, doesn't say anything about being paid or to murder police. It has a very neutral caption that said young people are in Hong Kong protesting. But this alternate caption was first posted by the Weibo account of the Chang'an Jian, which is a PRC Weibo account. And so instead of taking anything down, we made a notice and public notice regime where people, when they're shared this information, there's a kind of mandatory frame around it if they work with the fact checkers that said, oh, this information is contested because per the fact checkers, this caption was not the original Reuters caption. And so because of this, without taking anything down, we made sure that people enjoy access to media competence. That is to say, they can be their own media doing the fact-checking, the balancing of the reports and narrative and so on in a collaborative manner. And all these we built around 2018-19, which is before the pandemic.
Yeah, which of course then was useful and will be useful in the future. I mean, how many of these civic activists might there be? I know that's a silly question at one hand because there are probably, I don't know how many. Have you got a rough idea?
Sure. In the Gov Zero Slack channel at the moment, I just checked, there's exactly 10,486 people.
I like your precision. 10,486
It's
people.
like a personal computer model, right? 486.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when did you get into computing? I've got to ask this.
Sure. I got it into computing before 486. That was 1989. I was 8 years old. And I was reading some programming books on the bookshelf, but I didn't have access to a computer. So I drew with pencil a computer keyboard with QWERTY and so on, and start programming. Like I would type CLS, enter, and use an eraser to erase whatever on the upper half of the A4 paper, and then start writing, like literally writing programs. And after a few weeks, my parents got fed up with me, and so bought a first personal computer to me.
Yeah. What's interesting, you know, I'm clearly a digital immigrant and you're a digital native, and it's wonderful having a chat between the native you and the immigrant.
I'm a young immigrant.
Right, yes. I mean, one question that obviously arises is the balance of power between the big players here, you know, the government, the corporate, and the civic world. I mean, what is that? I mean, how should that operate, and how does it operate? I mean, I'm hearing obviously that the civic world is a driver, but just could you tell me a bit about that?
Definitely. In Taiwan, we call the civil society or voluntary sector and so on, we call it the social sector. which means that it's not the third, like small sector, it's the driving sector, the social sector. And so instead of public-private partnership, I call it a people-public-private partnership with people first. In concrete terms, it means that the social sector, the activists, sets the norm. For example, during 2018, a lot of people participated in opening up the data of our campaign donation and expenditure, because in Taiwan, it used to be, back in 2016, that only professional auditors employed by the National Auditing Office in the Control Yuan can audit the raw data of campaign donation expenditure. The individuals can only get like Xerox printer copies of the data, and there's no way to analyze it like with investigative journalism. And so Gov Zero people around 2015-16 started to do something like civil disobedience. They went into the Control Yuan building, took out the Xerox copies, and scanned it using computer vision to divide it to small tofu, that's to say small chunks of individual cells, and ask people to crowdsource the OCR. And we call it otaku character recognition, meaning that people with too much time on their hands can just work to reverse engineer the National Auditing Office campaign donation data. And because of that, the Control Yuan said you can't be sure, even with 3 people looking at every cell, you can't be sure this is absolutely correct. And we are like, well, of course, that's why you should publish the data yourself as open data. And so by the massive norm-setting power of civic technologists and activists, in 2018, finally, the Control Yuan published the open data of campaign donation and expenditure. And investigative journalists immediately discovered, well, the social media advertisement was not part of it. That means that people who are foreign people who could not legally donate to campaign donation has a loophole. Just pay Facebook or other social media companies, and they can get their targeted advertisement through during our campaign session. Of course, that's not acceptable. So I took this argument, I took the kind of threat of social sanction against Facebook, and we talked with Facebook and other social media companies and say, look, I don't really care what you previously did, but now, from now on, you need to treat campaign donation and social media advertisement for political and social issues during campaign as the same rule. You need to publish as open data. You need to reject foreign interference, foreign payment to such advertisement. And without passing any new law, this kind of like trade negotiation backed by social sanction, Facebook eventually did agree in 2019, and we become the first jurisdiction in which Facebook published its transparent advertisement library, and that led to 2020 election, which is remarkably free from the foreign-sponsored advertisements on social media. So this told us it's the social sector setting the norm, the public sector amplified this norm, and the economic sector just implements the social norm.
Yeah. I mean, I like that. I mean, I need to say that phrase again. The social sector sets the norm. Mm-hmm. The government or the government sector helps a bit around it, and let's say the social media companies respond. But have you got any bigger issues with the social media companies at the moment, or perhaps, let's say, to do with privacy and so on?
Yeah, we've worked on many issues. For example, the online merchandise scams, that's another issue. Of course, hate speech and like intimate images disclosed on social media and so on. And many of these things in Taiwan, we have a strong social norm around which that the public sector simply relays it to the social media companies saying, you know, it's not the government forcing you to obey any particular law, but if you do not operate according to this very clearly spelled out social norm and self-regulate, well, you may face social sanction. And because in Taiwan, we've got alternatives, there are civic public infrastructures like truly pro-social social media. For example, the PTT, which has been operating for 25 years as part of National Taiwan University's academic network and, well, doesn't have any shareholder or advertisers. And so when PTT implements something, chances are Facebook will be pressured to implement something equivalent, because otherwise people always have a choice to socially sanction Facebook.
And so PDT, is that as, in a sense, as nearly as popular as Facebook? I mean, we're just using Facebook as an example here.
Well, there's many platforms. PTT is very popular. There's also Line. There's also Dcard. There's many other things. So, for example, when Line, the end-to-end encrypted messenger, implemented the counter disinformation collaborative fact-checking proposal, they even provided a dashboard that showed what are the most trending user-reported rumors in Taiwan and which ones have been fact-checked as true or false, so that we have early access to the basic transmission rate, right, to the R value of each and every disinformation variant or strain, and then we can focus our kind of inoculation effort on the strains that are actually mutating to reach more people, if I'm not overstretching a metaphor, and do not squander our resources on the disinformation that are actually not part of the community spread stage. And so by providing this line is showing Facebook, along with other players, that it is possible to collaborate with the civil society, with the social sector on such matters. And then Facebook eventually just joined after Line. So this is a complex ecosystem. It's not just PTT and Facebook. It's also, for example, our leading antivirus company, Trend Micro, which offers the same fact-checking bot that also spots deepfakes and scams and things like that. So this ecosystem allows any player that conforms best to the social sector norms to thrive, because people will purchase its product and services more and exert pressure on other private sector players.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the word hate speech. I suppose we're back to this question of social norms. Are we here, or how does that work, controlling that? Effectively, a version often of misinformation.
Yes. In Taiwan, what we're focusing on is making sure there are pro-social social media, not just the more anti-social corners of social media. So, for example, when we are working on, say, marriage equality, this is a very serious topic and a lot of controversies around which that exist on the society. If we do the deliberation on Facebook, then we can't really rule out hate speech, right? Even if there's some keywords and so on, people will find a way to post hate speech when we're talking about marriage equality and how to legalize it, which is why we built our own deliberation and e-participation platform, join the GOV, the TW, that has more than 10 million people, half of our adult population participating. So our marriage equality, or the right for single mothers to get kind of artificial impregnation help and things like that, all these are deliberated on this platform that doesn't even have a reply button. So it's just people's proposals. You can support it. You can post counter arguments. You can vote. You can upvote or downvote, but you can't reply across aisles. So there really is no room for trolls to grow. We learned it from Better Reykjavik from Iceland. And so this space, coupled with face-to-face collaborative meetings, live stream meetings, and so on, made sure that people with initially different positions can eventually discover common values. For example, by registering the same rights and duties of the bylaws of marriage, but not touching the in-laws, the family-to-family relationships. So when we legalize marriage equality, it's just the individuals that wed, but their families do not. And this satisfied a little bit of both sides of the equation. So the point is, do not hold town halls in the digital equivalent of nightclubs. I mean, nightclubs may have a large crowd, but they are also very noisy. They serve addictive drinks, lots of advertisers, private bouncers, and so on. And no local government or national government would hold town halls and deliberations and hearings in a local nightclub. And I'm not saying nightclubs are bad. I mean, there is certainly a room for nightclubs in a municipality. It's just we should not hold our democracy as part of that venue.
Yeah. I mean, in Europe, of course, there's a sort of discussion about a third way, neither domination by US corporates nor the heavy-handed government approach of some countries. I'm thinking of digital authoritarianism. I suppose we were referring to the mainland. Do you think there is a third way? I mean, or could we describe what you're doing as the evolving third way?
Yeah, the reason why I don't say the third sector and instead the social sector is to recognize that we're the first. You talk about digital natives, but the true digital natives are the people in the Internet Engineering Task Force, people in the Internet Society, the people who designed and built the Internet. And the in Internet points to this sort of social sector, of open innovation, of end-to-end principle, and so on. So in a sense, these are the first, right, to come. The Internet itself is built around these open and social sector multi-stakeholder principles. So I would call it maybe the zeros way, and starting first. But yeah, I do think that people-public-private partnership in this order is superior to either the state dominating or the big corporations dominating.
I mean, I love that phrase you used. I think sort of the hardware root of trust and the supply chain of trust. I mean, all I can say, yes. I love the phrase, if I can just mention that. Can I just switch to the idea of the creative bureaucracy?
Sure.
I mean, what do you think about this idea of the creative bureaucracy?
I think career public servants are the most innovative people in the world. They're just not very loud about it. And when I was 14 years old, I went to the head of my school, my middle school, and the school director, Du Huiping, listened to my case because I said, principal, I discovered this thing called the World Wide Web, and I found that my textbooks are all out of date. So I want to do research on this new thing called the World Wide Web, and I want to spend 16 hours a day, not just 8 hours a day, on it. And so I would like you to exempt me from your school. And I understand it's not quite legal, but I would really like to focus all my time on the World Wide Web. And after reading the email printouts and the preprints and so on, Principal Du thought about it a minute. And then she said, okay, from tomorrow on, you don't have to go to my school anymore. Good luck with your research. I'm like, yay. So from that moment on, I think the career public service are the most innovative people because it, frankly speaking, was not legal. And she basically paved the way to the Experimental Alternative School Act that Taiwan would pass just a few years after that. But without her innovation and creativity, it would not be possible for me to start my first startup just a year afterward.
Oh, can you give me her name at some point? Because we have these awards for hidden heroes who are unsung. And at some point, perhaps she should get this symbolic award from us for having effectively developed something.
Sure.
I mean, tell me just a tiny bit about that school.
Sure. So the middle school is called Beizhen Junior High, and it's very close to where I used to live, near the National Zhengzhi University. And it's a very liberal school, and the principal, Du Huiping, really was very kind when I took a lot of time away to do science fairs in the first couple years in the school. So I guess what the creativity requires is both a flexibility, that's to say, take a hard look at all the different sides of the situation, and also a core value, because she always wanted me to work with researchers, and she used to tell me that I need to have a good grade to get into a good gymnasium, a good senior high school, and to get good GRE scores, and then to find a good researcher, maybe overseas, working as postdoc, and then you can, she said, do the research you want. But when I told her, look, principal, here is a printout of an email, I get a direct email exchange with leading researchers on artificial intelligence. And they didn't even know that I'm just 14 years old. They just treated me as a peer, right, as a fellow researcher. and she's like, wow. so as long as the common value is met, she did not insist on the particular methods to reach such values, because frankly speaking, her way would take me 10 years, but through the Wild Web, it is immediate, right? And so by realizing that we share the same value, she did not insist on the particulars. I think that's creativity.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing. I mean, would you say that there are quite a few of these hidden heroes in Taiwan lurking in the background?
Definitely. I mean, as the digital minister, my office comprises of secondments from around 12 different ministries, and each and every one are very creative. And in my office, even though some of them are like department head level, some of them are section chief level, because they come from different ministries and councils, there's no superior-inferior relationship. It's not based on rank, because each ministry offers a different perspective, and people look at a systemic issue, and we take all the sides to make sure that we can save time and reduce risk for everyone. And this is interesting because it enabled high velocity policy making, like we built the mask rationing system, the infrastructure in 3 days, the SMS-based check-in system for contact tracing in 3 days, and later on we will repurpose them into the vaccine appointment system. But this high velocity, interestingly, reduced the risk for everyone involved, because on the first design stage, there's already a variety of perspectives from different ministries. So this is like the Autobahn of Germany. The faster you drive, actually the safer you get.
I love that phrase, high velocity policy making. It's brilliant. I mean, have you, how many people are in your ministry, in fact?
Mm-hmm. There is no digital ministry yet. We're working on the founding act. What we have is an interagency cross-ministerial office. Right.
Yeah,
so each person that got seconded into the office, of course, work with a team in their original ministry. And we only allow one person from each ministry to second here at a time, because otherwise the Foreign Service would love to send 20 people and then we become part of Foreign Service. Right? And so each person work as a point of contact, but actually there's a huge team behind them in each ministry. So I am a minister with a portfolio, meaning a minister at large working across ministries.
Yeah.
So these core secondments, around 12 of them, civil society experts, around another 12 of them, work with around 100 people, the participation officer network embedded in each and every ministry. So that is a kind of a horizontal, virtual, ad hoc ministry that's not quite a ministry.
No, it's there and not there at the same time in some way.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, so many of the things you're talking about seem counterintuitive, but are in fact the new common sense. It is the way I'm thinking about it.
Yes.
I mean, so in a sense, what you've described is how a future bureaucracy might operate. Mm-hmm. I suppose one question is, where next after digitization, if I can say a stupid phrase like that?
Sure.
I mean,
so to me, digital transformation is not just about digitization. In Taiwan, our national plan for smart society and smart country is DIGI. Digitization is the first step. Upon that is innovation. Upon that is governance. And then on top of that, inclusion. So in a sense, inclusion is the final goal. And digitization, innovation, and governance is just the kind of intermediate points before we reach true inclusion. And by inclusion, we mean not only including the young people too young to vote, but have a lot of brilliant ideas into democracy. We mean not just including the immigrants, like people who do not have citizenship into policy making. We also mean including people who have no way to operate a smartphone. We also mean including people who are yet to be born, born, like taking care of future generations' environment to factor in the climate as well as the wider environment, the planetary ecosystem into our democratic process. So this inclusion with AI to becoming, I guess, good enough ancestors.
Yeah. Oh, I like that phrase, good enough ancestors. Can I borrow some of your phrases?
Definitely, of course. I
philosophy.
relinquish all the copyright, so let's go ahead and use it.
All right. Okay, that's wonderful. Well, Audrey, thank you so much for having a conversation with me. And I hope we can have another conversation sometime.
Definitely.
Ideally in reality.
Definitely. I look forward to meet you in person, and until then, live long and prosper.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.